I saw you had commented on a Facebook post saying like to somebody, imagine if we called out the blow out your kidneys gurus, and basically just saying, again, kind of expanding on the craziness of today. And I know you were saying it's a lot of these guys who maybe they're going for their pro card, or it's what's on social media. But I do think part of it is probably also what their coaches are saying. And unfortunately now, anybody can give advice, right? And so you have people who say, I'll turn you into a pro. Hey, 100 people, here's my drug protocol. 10 of you might be hospitalized, but 5 of you are going to go pros. So, hey, here's my 5 pro clients. This is what I do. So I don't know if maybe you could just expand on that a little bit on why the doses are so high, who they're getting these recommendations from, just all that area, because it obviously is getting worse over time.
Yeah, it's definitely getting worse. And, I think, so when I was coming up, there really wasn't, internet coaching didn't really exist. You had coaches that maybe trained at the gym with you, the people who were local in your town, but there wasn't these internet gurus. And, I think Chad Nichols was probably the one who really started, he started working with a lot of top guys and really kind of popularized that model of working with a lot of people. But most of us had to figure out a lot of stuff on our own, and we had to talk to each other, see what each other was doing, figure stuff out on our own. Certainly the magazines didn't share a whole lot of stuff, particularly about the chemical side. They didn't share anything really worthwhile. Bill Llewellyn's books were the only thing that was really good. Mm-hmm. But now you have guys that want to be famous, and they see the opportunity, and they, these guys will be in their early 20s, and they'll come in and they'll work with, maybe one coach or 2 coaches. They'll bounce around from a couple coaches, then go, okay, now I'm the coach. And that's what's happening with a lot of these young guys is, they'll go from coach to coach to coach, and then they're trying to suck all the information they can out of them, which, hey, it's not a bad business model. If that's what you want to do, if you just want to go from coach to coach to coach and take what they know and then turn around and claim it as your own, I mean, whatever. But that's what happens. So they don't really have experience. They never had to experiment. So when they work with a coach that has, they see somebody that takes, maybe a pro takes, say, a gram a test. Then a young kid comes in and says, well, then everybody should be on a gram a test, or a gram and a half, or 2 grams, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. A gram a tren. They don't even know. They haven't even experimented enough to even know how good you could do with 500 megs a test and 300 megs a tren. That is enough to do a lot. Yeah. But they don't even know. They've virtually no experience. They've just worked with a coach the whole a couple times. And that's where I am so thankful. I had to figure out a lot of the chemical stuff on my own, because if I were to jump into the sport now and get one of these coaches, they'd be like, okay, John, 1.5 grams of test and a gram of tren, a gram of masteron, 20 units of GH. And they're just idiots. Yeah. They just are. Like, I'm not anti-drug, but I am anti-stupidity. And, I've had guys that I turned pro when I started working with them. I cut their doses in half. Yeah. I've done it with a couple guys where I actually cut what they were doing in half, and they got bigger and turned pro. They felt better. They felt more healthy. Their bodies worked better. I don't have people use diuretics when they compete, but I've produced some of the most shredded guys out there because I know it's possible, because I experimented. Now, I've done it the other way too. I took every diuretic you could possibly take. Yeah. But
you kind of got just as lean without them eventually.
I eventually figured out that I could show, it's really obvious when you think about it. If you ask most people, when did you look your best? It's always before the show or after the show. So it's like, okay, what did you do? Well, I changed what I was eating and I added in diuretics. Okay, well, it didn't work. You looked better before and after. Yeah. Most people just need to be really lean. Mm-hmm. And when you're real, I'll give you an example. I got a guy I work with, Josh Wade. I've worked with Josh for years. Josh consistently shows up at every show, absolutely ripped. Ask any pro bodybuilder and they'll tell you that. Mm-hmm. Josh never uses diuretics. He's just lean. He's really lean. Mm-hmm. I worked with a guy named Terrence Ruffin who just got second at the Arnold Classic.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal condition.
I didn't know you worked with him. That's awesome.
People message me, "Oh man, how'd you dry him out?" Well, I didn't use any diuretics, none. And actually, Terrence was like, the first show he did, New York last year, he won, and he worked with me then. He was like, "You don't want me to take any?" I was like, "No, you don't need to, dude. Look how you look."
Yeah.
And then he looked even better for the Arnold because I had some more time to work with him. And so he was like, "Wow." He didn't know you could get, and I was the same way. I used diuretics my entire career up until 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a coach that came up into the room to see me, and he was very stoic. And he just looked at me and he asked me what diuretics I had. I pulled out my handful of them, and he said, "Let me see him." And I handed them to him, and he went into the bathroom, he dropped them in the toilet, and he flushed the toilet. And I was like, "Why'd you do that for?" He's like, "Because you look perfect. I don't want to change a thing." And then the next day, I looked great. It was one of the best looks I ever had. I was back in the first call out to Mr. North America. So for me, I had to actually see that you could look that way without a diuretic. So I had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
I actually experienced it. And I think
Right.
a lot of these young coaches, if they just had the experience, in some cases, they're hurting people and they just don't care. They keep hurting people. In some cases, I don't think there's any malicious intent. I just think they don't know.
Yeah.
And I listen, I understand, man. Like, I'm a big experimenter. I always wanted to experiment with everything I could when I was competing because I just thought it was interesting. But as a coach, you've got a couple different kinds of coaches. You got some coaches that just want to be famous so bad. If people get hurt in the process, they just get hurt in the process and you won't hear about them. The people will drop off. Then you have other coaches like that, they're not trying to hurt anyone. They just haven't had that experience to know, oh, you know what? Maybe you don't need a gram of Trent, know?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of how it shapes up.
So let me ask, now that you've competed for decades, you're very experienced in kind of all realms of bodybuilding. Now you've backed off to HRT, which I don't know if you tell anybody your protocol. I imagine it's just,
it's real simple. It's a shot of cypionate every Saturday. It's 200 mgs every Saturday. Yeah.
and no growth hormone or anything with it.
I was taking growth hormone for about a year and a half at like 2-3 IUs, but I haven't taken any now for probably a year.
Okay. So do you believe that, I think most people, they'll argue about the health detriments of PEDs, right? And obviously different ones can have different issues. I would imagine that with the amount and like the span of time that you use, there's some, maybe it's, some people would argue, hey, I was going to be 90, now I'm going to be 85. Other people would argue, man, you just took 20 years off. Unfortunately, there's no way to know, right? If somebody gets a heart attack, they might take 40 years off that they weren't otherwise. I do know a guy who he had a clotting disorder. And so he had a heart attack, pretty massive heart attack when he was like 40. And he probably did take 30 plus years off his life. And then you have other people who will be 80 plus. So obviously there's always the risk. I was just curious for you. Obviously you're an intelligent guy. I'm sure you weighed the costs and benefits there. At this point, how do you feel moving forward with your health? Do you think that there's a good chance you'll live a healthy life the rest of your time, or do you think you've done some significant damage?
Well, that's a very fair question, first of all, because you're right. I've been in this a long time. When Dallas McCarver died, I think it sent shockwaves through the community.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that happened when he died, I remember what I thought. I remember thinking, I may not have been taken as much as Dallas, but I've been in this a long time. So I got really scared.
Yeah.
Blood work only shows you so much.
Right.
So I wanted to see specifically what my heart was like. So I went and got a calcium score test so they can look at the calcification in your arteries. Your HDL can tell you one thing in blood work, but all the medical stuff. So if your HDL is low, you have a higher probability of this, that, blah, blah, blah. Well, I wanted to see, forget the blood work. I want a scan of my heart. I want to see. So I got a calcium score test done. You get this thing called an Agatston score, and they test 3 of the main arteries in your heart. 2 of mine were clear, and one of them scored, I want to say it was an 18. So I went to my doctor and then to another cardiologist. And I looked up how to interpret it myself, but I want to know what they thought. And they're both like, "You're great. You're awesome. You're good. You're very healthy for your age." And Dr. Serrano, of course, has worked with me since I was 27 years old.
Wow.
So he was just like, he was happy. He was like, "See, So for me, you just don't know. But I think the things that are really dangerous, I think the diuretics is one that people got to be really careful with. In particular, the electrolyte imbalances that occur, but then people go crazy on their diet right afterwards. And what we've seen the last couple of years is there's been some people who died a couple of days after the show.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous one. And I remember those days. I remember competing at a certain weight, and then Wednesday, the following week, being 25 pounds heavier and feeling terrible, getting nosebleeds. Like, that's not good. That's a bad thing.